progress, but I'm, you know, a happy ending, I think.
And did your take on the material change during that time? And then again, and maybe David could talk about when he came into it, if there was a sort of further gestation of the project.
I think to start with, the film was called Sabina because it was mostly centered on Sabina Spielrein. But in between the original screenplay and the stage play, it dawned on me that the central character was not Sabina, couldn't really be Sabina. The central character had to be Jung. So there was quite a shift in emphases. And then I guess you know, David will talk about it, but the work that I did with him mostly had to do with refining it, I think, and sharpening it and honing it.
Yes.
Well, actually, maybe David, you can answer this question, because I was especially watching it again this morning. I thought did you ever fear that it might be redundant at this point in your career to make a movie about Freud and Jung, having made so many films about sexual perversion, split personalities, horror of the body, and so forth? And how did you find your way into it?
That doesn't sound like me to me. I think that I've made a lot of comedies, actually. But no, I don't really think about my other movies at all, frankly. I don't think about what I've done at all. When I decide to do something, become passionate about it, I'm only interested in realizing that particular thing. So I don't think about whether this fits in with anything or doesn't, or I've done it or not. I mean, once I get excited about it. I think when I read Christopher's play, and I've never seen it performed, but I felt, in retrospect, I think that I had always wanted to do something about Freud and the birth of psychoanalysis. But to say that isn't to say anything, really, because it's such a vast topic and full of the panoply of incredible characters that surrounded the birth of psychoanalysis, all of them very eccentric and wonderful. And what I saw in Christopher's play was this fantastic structure that really beautifully distilled the essence of the era and of the psychoanalytic movement into primarily 5 characters. And I thought that got me very excited, because suddenly that was, you know, the structure that could allow me to play with all of those topics. I have to point out that the first movie I ever made, Transfer, 7 minutes long, was about a psychiatrist and a patient. That was my first movie. So this really does feel like.
Michael, can you tell us a little bit about how you became involved with the project, and a little bit about David as a director of actors, because I think the performances in the film are so completely stunning.
Yeah, we first met in Toronto. I flew up to have a lunch with David, and that's really when he started sort of directing me, if you like. I always think, you know, great directors are great manipulators, and you know, he was already, you know, planting seeds in my mind then at that lunch about, you know, the story and what he found interesting about these various characters, and where he thought sort of Jung was coming from and his background. And we just had a really nice lunch, and then we talked a lot about motor racing, which we both share a passion for. And then really, by the time we got on set, I think the one great thing, well, one of the many great things about David is he allows you to sort of breathe within it in your own way. You know, it's like, again, with, you know, great directors, I find, don't necessarily give you a huge amount of direction on the day. It's maybe a dinner that you had 2 nights before or a week before, just little sort of hints and little nudges and sort of sway you in certain directions, but without giving you anything sort of solidly, now you do this. I think any sort of great director that sort of worked with that for them is the sort of is the last thing that they want. It's really a very sort of collaborative process, and one that's just very sort of free, and he creates a very safe place to create and take risks try things out. And I have to say, it was a very humorous set, but everybody had done their homework, and came ready to go to work. And I think that's what sort of already the respect that David has sort of commands that of his actors.
And Jeremy, you've had a long working relationship with David by this point. Did this film present any unique challenges from a production standpoint vis-a-vis other projects that you've done together?
I suppose compared to many projects, this was a fairly simple project because we shot it in Germany, in Cologne, in the studio there, and with nice atmosphere, and quite a very safe place to work. I mean, the principal problem today for me is getting the resources to make a film as beautiful as this, because you can see the enormous amount of work and research and care went into the way the film was made, into the details in the film and the research in the film. And I mean, it was easy for me to do the film because David and I worked a couple of times before things started dating. In fact, long later, Moni called me and told me, "Are you interested in that?" And I thought, yeah, I want to do it. And then we went on a journey which a couple of hiccups, a couple of false starts, but was really most enjoyable. One of the most enjoyable films I've ever been involved with. And we filmed the balance of the film in Lake Constance, which is a very large lake in southern Germany, and that also is a sort of idyllic place to work, which really helped the film and helped concentrate on his work.
Questions from the press? Yes, on the end.
One of the most stunning images is the boat with red sail. Is that from the letters? Did Jan have a boat? How did it go?
Yeah, it was a present from his wife, exactly as in the film.
Yeah, I have to. This opens the question of accuracy, and I have to say, I think this movie is incredibly accurate in terms of the dialogue and all the sort of historical details, because that was an era, as you could see from the movie, of great letter writing, and these were very obsessive people, and so they recorded all their conversations and all their moments and all their dreams and analyzed them to death and so on. So we have huge documents. A ton of documents to back up really everything in the movie. So it's really quite accurate actually, in all the details.
In the front, yes.
Could you talk about David and Michael, about the choice of accents and costumes at the time, and what was the point of framing him in the way that you did? And also, just a little side note, you didn't identify any of the other, I know you were saying that you didn't want to give Cook's away, but you didn't identify any of the other disciples at the time. Is there, was that to keep focus, or was there another?
It's two questions. One about just for people who couldn't hear, one about the use of accents in the film. How did they determine the use of accents? And also the question about why none of the other disciples are shown in the film other than Sabina.
I sort of asked Michael if he could do any accents other than his own strange accent, this Irish thing. And he said, well, I could probably do a bit of an English one. So I said, okay, let's go with that. No, I'm sort of lying. Basically,
Yes.
It was really a very interesting kind of research to do, because the question would be, okay, did Freud have even a trace of a Yiddish accent when he spoke German? Did he speak Yiddish? Did he have a Viennese accent? He wasn't born in Vienna. He wasn't a native Viennese. Would he have had a Viennese accent? Would he have spoken High German instead? And also, of course, Jung. Would he was a Swiss German. Did he have a Swiss German accent? Or would he too have reverted to High German? And there are recordings of Jung speaking English. You can see them on YouTube. He did a lot of interviews. He died in 1961. For Freud, there's really only one recording of his voice, and he's speaking English except for the end of it. And I did ask our German producer to tell me whether he sensed any kind of Viennese accent in what Freud was saying. The answer was no. He didn't. There was no Viennese accent there. So I felt that they definitely would speak High German to each other, because seriousness was an important business for these guys. They wanted really to be taken seriously as physicians, as medical men, as scientists, and so they would have dispensed with any regionality in what they were, even in their writing and their speaking. And they're both considered to be absolutely beautiful writers of German. Their literary qualities as writers are really highly valued. And once again, that would be, High German. It would be very formal, beautiful German. So that would lead us to say, okay, now how does that translate into English? And at that point, we're saying it would be what we call received English, which is a kind of a standard English accent, not too posh, but not East End London either. And then for Kira, we had, because she was a Russian, and I was sure, though there's no recordings of her, that she would have spoken German with a Russian accent, so I asked her to do a bit of a Russian accent. And that's how we gradually got to where we were with the accent.
Yeah, it started when we sort of discussed mid-Atlantic, didn't we, first? And then we realized that we don't know what that means.
Because you'd sink in the middle of the ocean and it's cold.
And then sort of, it was actually that first time that we had lunch, we first discussed it, and it's like then, I think the great thing about sort of that sort of received pronunciation is that, when you're doing a period piece, I think it helps you sort of disappear into another era. And also, anybody in the academic world back then would not have passed or be taken seriously if they didn't speak Hochdeutsch, High German. And then we sort of took little differences then between Vigo's accent and my own. We wanted to show some sort of a colloquialism with Jung. So I didn't go very high English, and Vigo chose to go more clipped with his English to show the sort of difference there. And then, as David was saying, to sort of highlight the fact that Sabina was Russian, to have her do sort of Russian accent.
Well, you see Ferenczi on the boat, and he did travel to America with Freud and Jung. And I actually carefully in the scene in the Munich hotel where they're arguing about the cartouches and so on, I carefully cast every character there to look like the people who were actually at that meeting. Or there's an Ernest Jones and there's everybody there, but it's just for me, It's the same with Freud's family. I mean, I certainly have a little Anna Freud and the Wright, and we cast them all very carefully for those who care. But there was no room for them, their drama in the movie. There just couldn't be. I mean, it would just expand. You could make more than a miniseries out of those characters.
Yes, there.
A question to Mr. Hampton broadly. The relationship between the two men who were friends, and the relationship between the two women, particularly the scene where she comes to visit and kind of tells her troubles possibly within. How do you contrast the behavior of men and the behavior of the women?
A question about comparing the friendship of the two men in the film to the relationship between the two women.
Well, the men are far more childish, far less
Nothing
mature.
changes.
No, far less mature. Nothing changes. And I think, in the end, it was a mighty clash of egos between the men. And one of the things you might say about that is that one of the reasons we don't know anything about Sabina Spielrein is because, her contribution to the history of psychoanalysis is really not recognized, because the people she was talking to were busy claiming the high ground for themselves. So that there is evidence. Freud gave her a footnote about the death instinct. Jung, to whom she talked about archetypes and the anima and all that kind of thing, I'm afraid to say never gave her any credit at all. The last scene of the film, I think, is probably the only scene which might not have happened.
What?
I know, but I'm owning up now. But I think that, I believe that the two women would have had that kind of relationship, a kind of very, very adult understanding of what was going on. It's just my...
I think it should be said that Emma Young was a very interesting woman in her own right, and wrote a couple of books about mythology, and ended up being a psychoanalyst herself. So the idea that they should talk that way is very legitimate, I think. And once again, we didn't. Christopher's original draft of the script alluded to that, and I just thought but it came at the end, and I thought it was such a potent thing to realize that she had ambitions herself to be a psychoanalyst, that I thought the movie couldn't contain it at that point, so we just took that little reference out. But it is true. It seemed that everybody who came in contact with psychoanalysis ended up being an analyst. You know, it was just irresistible. They couldn't let go of it just when their analysis was over. They wanted more, and part of the way to do that was to become a psychoanalyst yourself.
It's like working in the theatre.
Way in the back, yes.
I was wondering, with that much research to go on in Sabina, how did you help Keira Knightley develop the character both emotionally but also physically in the earlier scenes?
A question about how Keira Knightley developed her character both emotionally and also physically in her hysterical scenes.
Well, unbeknownst to me, Keira went to Christopher for advice. He screwed it all up to me. It took me ages to undo the damage that he did. But he did give her a stack of books to read, as did I, in fact. But beyond that, we began, of course, with the first scenes, which were the hysteria scenes. And hysteria was, a disease that seems to have disappeared. It seemed to have been a kind of a product of that era, and the repression of women that was part of that culture. In fact, the word hysteria comes from the Greek word that means uterus, and at times they would actually remove the uteruses of hysterical women, thinking that that might cure them. So that gives you a bit of the context. However extreme it might seem at the beginning, what Keira does there is actually very subdued compared with what Sabina Spielrein would have presented to Jung. And in fact, Christopher has mentioned that he's actually seen the notes that Jung wrote on her admission, detailing her symptoms. So we knew very well what the symptoms of her particular version of hysteria were. And then there was actually film footage of hysterical patients at the turn of the century, and a lot of photos. The Dr. Charcot, who was a big influence on Freud, specialized in hysteria. And so all these strange partial paralyses and hysterical laughters and deforming of the body and twisting and tormenting your physical posture and so on, all of those are documented. And so for me, basically, it was to say to decide how high we could pitch that. It's very difficult to watch. It makes you very uncomfortable, as it would. But we had to deliver the disease to you, the audience, so that you would understand why she was completely disabled, that she was dysfunctional, and that's why she was brought to this institute, because she couldn't function. So we had to show how extreme it was, and I felt that it should really be centered around the mouth, because she is being asked by Jung, it is called the talking cure, to say unspeakable things about herself, about her dreams, about her sexuality, about her masochism and all of that, masturbation, things that you were not supposed to speak about. So the idea that she should be trying to speak, the words try to come out, but another part of her tries to prevent those words from coming out, to deform them so that they're not understandable. That's how we did that, and so on. And then sort of gradually, as she loses the hysteria and becomes more and more confident under Jung's tutelage, and then has her affair and so on, you can see the evolution of the character. But I have to say, it's just, as Michael was saying, I mean, all of the prep was pretty much done in these discussions. I mean, a lot of directing happens off the set. It happens when you're choosing the clothes that you wear, for example. It happens when you look at the locations and so on. And by the time we got to the set, Keira was there. I mean, it was fantastic. I mean, 2 takes and finished.
It was quite incredible, actually, if I just sort of add to that, because we were, what, 4 days ahead by week 2? Because
Well, after 3 days, we were 5 days ahead. That's which seems impossible, but part of it was that I literally had boarded the schedule to take into account how difficult it might be to develop Kira's performance. I'd never worked with her before, and this was very difficult stuff, and it was sort of terrain that was new to her. And she was just so good and so right on that we were finished in no time.